That was my mistake, totally. Gosh. I'm really honored to be here. It's amazing, and I mean this even on the heels of that self-promoting bio. I stand here humbly. I've been so lucky and so not lucky. I've had a lot of serendipity in my life. I'm very grateful for that. And I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've learned from my journey as I guess more of a student of life and a student of that space out there. And a lot of you are here as social entrepreneurs, and you start out with a question of, I know this will work. You promised it would work. And here it goes. Is it possible? Is it possible that we can have businesses or live in a world where there isn't too big to fail? Oh, this really needs to work for me. There we go. Is it possible to live in a world where the processes that generate the things that we need don't automatically produce waste? You might be asking, is it possible to live in a community, an organization, in an ecosystem where I don't have to hate my competition? Where competition isn't something to be feared or loathed or hated or crushed? Maybe your question is it possible to have an organization where the knowledge that we've accumulated isn't lost every single time somebody walks out the door? For me, that world exists. It's not a theoretical question. I know it exists. I see it every single time I go outside, or every single time that I go out in the middle of the night. Just yesterday, down at the beach. I'm from the United States, and I don't even have to go past my own backyard. That world exists. Now, I'll admit, I do see the world a little differently. I always have. And I blame it on my superpower. Now, I steadfastly believe, I'm not bragging about my superpower, I will in a minute, but I do believe, a buddy of mine always said, he said, I haven't done enough yet to be humble. And so that's just it. I just haven't done enough yet to be humble. I'm not going to feign humility here, Omar.
We just miss the Andes on the outside.
Yeah. I came upon, I feel lucky. I believe this hive that we live in, this thing, this society, we all have superpowers. I do believe that. Some of us go through life and we never work to discover them. I was so lucky. I discovered my superpower when I was a little kid. Guess who I am in that picture? Clearly the cutest one. I was a cute kid, wasn't I? Just objectively here, let's take a look at that. I got my two brothers there and my cousin. They're pretty dorky looking, but that little kid there, he's a doll. Anyway. I had a confluence of events, right? Like every little kid, I wanted to be something bigger than what I was. I wanted a superpower, right? Now, I wasn't the brightest kid, and I probably still am not, but I knew that I couldn't shoot lasers out of my eyes. At least I thought. I was pretty sure. And as enticing as it was to get bit by a radioactive spider, and have webs shoot out of your wrist. I thought that would be cool, but I doubted that that was possible. So I was on a quest for a superpower, and I needed one. And it so happens that at the exact same time, near the same time that that photo was taken, for my birthday, I got my first album. Like, not a photo album, but you guys remember LPs? I guess they're coming back now. Vinyl. It was this. Now, you can judge my parents later, right? I mean, maybe it's not the best thing to give your 8-year-old an album about drug-induced hallucinations, but whatever. My parents were into that. Anyway, there's a song on that album, and I played it until the needle was rubbed off. I played this album over and over and over, but there was a line in this song called Nobody Home. It says, I see a electric light. I've got second sight. Does anybody know the next line? Any Pink Floyd fans? I've got amazing powers of observation. Ding, ding, ding! I can do that. That's my superpower. Look, if you say you can shoot spider webs out of your wrist, that's something that people can objectively test. But if you say, I got a superpower. Really? What's your superpower? I got amazing powers of observation. How do you test that, really? So I said, that's my superpower. Now I just needed a muse. And this is where my story really begins. I was an observant kid. And my mom always says that she talks about the brothers, and I'm the youngest of 3. And she talks about the oldest as being the smart one, and she talks about the middle one as being the creative one. And she always described me as the special one. I think that she was referring to my amazing powers of observation. That's what I believe. So I'm going to talk about this confluence in my life of my superpower, and now I just needed something to be observant about. And I was fortunate, just a few months after I got this album, I was sledding with my brothers. In the upper Midwest where I'm from a state called Indiana. We get a lot of snow. And we go to this hill where we always went sledding. Sledding, where I'm from, is kind of like surfing here, only a lot less cool. So we were going to this hill to go sledding, and it's called Devil's Backbone. Every town where I'm from has a devil's backbone, right? It's as adventurous as it sounds. You know, there's trees all over the place. It's very steep. There's rocks. There's things to hit yourself on. And my brothers would say, okay, Joe, you're too little to go down Devil's Backbone. You can sled down this other hill. And I said, when they weren't looking, I'm big enough to go down Devil's Backbone. So I hop on my sled, and the first tree goes whizzing by. The second tree, the third tree, face first, right into the tree. And my nose was bleeding. I had a cut lip. I lost a tooth. Fortunately, I had them to lose because they were still like baby teeth. Yeah, so that was good. And as I rolled over, right, and I was about to scream in pain, I rolled over and I saw this. A barred owl swooped down, and unbeknownst to me, I had apparently scared a squirrel out of the tree that I had hit. And it swooped down over my face, and its talons were as big as my 7-year-old head. And I thought I was going to die. I thought this thing was coming to take me away. And it reaches behind me, and it grabs that squirrel. Beep! It's the only sound the squirrel made. And it takes it up, and now I stand up, and I'm watching. I had never seen an owl before. And I'm watching this owl, and I'm watching this process. The owl grabs the squirrel, and the squirrel fights for a second, but not very long at all. I'll come back to that later. But it chirps a couple times, almost like saying, bye, Mom. And the owl just sits there, talons squeezed, until it dies. and it proceeds to eat the squirrel in front of me. It ate the tail. It ate the eyes. It ate the guts. It ate everything. Now, as I stood there bleeding, I realized two things at that moment. Number one, I have never been as hungry as that owl. And number two, no matter how much I hurt, I wasn't as bad a shape as that squirrel. So count your blessings, right? My face is bloody, my eye is black, my tooth is out, but I'm good. At least I'm not that squirrel. But what struck me about that, remember my superpower at that age I'm starting to hone it. As I'm observing everything, I watched that squirrel didn't fight too much. It gave up the ghost, right? Why? Energy is too important to biology. I'm caught, I'm dead, right? Let's not fight this, right? When I watched the owl fly over, there was no wasted movement. Everything was efficient. The owl didn't waste one morsel of that squirrel. There was no waste in that process. Biology values energy. Think about your companies. Think about the enterprises that you run or that you're going to run. You have inputs into those processes. And out of those processes, there might be some little bit or some lot of bit of waste. That's not a good system. It's a broken system. Good systems don't produce waste. This was an epiphany to me. And so when I started my business, I started a company that helped large companies, I say, become safer, cleaner, leaner, greener. Basically reduce waste. One of the companies that I worked with, General Motors. General Motors is the largest car company in the world, and maybe you may like General Motors, you may not have an opinion of General Motors, and maybe some people don't like General Motors. How many people have put out trash to be collected in the last 2 weeks? Almost everybody raised their hand. General Motors has 120 manufacturing plants that make cars, engines, transmissions. 120 that for the last 4 years have not put out one shred of waste to a landfill. Why? You say, well, how is that possible? Because they rethought possible. They said, the stuff that comes into our process, we paid for. We have something that creates value at the other side, and then we got this other stuff. Well, that's waste. Don't treat it like that. We got to think differently about our businesses. We got to start thinking differently about how we think about waste. And understanding biology, particularly birds, and particularly started at this very moment, I believe, is my understanding of energy and biological systems and how efficient they are, provided me an impetus to go help companies understand that. That was my first epiphany, the bright age of 7 or 8. Another epiphany happened when I was, I'd say about close to 20, 1991 or so. Now, I was dating this young lady. I was in college, and I had never taken a girl home to meet my parents. So this was a big day. She was coming home with me for Thanksgiving. Something has changed. And so we're driving down the road, and I see this flash in front of me. And it looks like a black bird with a giant red head. And I said, and there it is. I locked up the brakes. This is the God-honest truth. I lock up the brakes on this country road, leave skid marks 100 meters long. I hop out of the car. I start throwing clothes, which you're in college, you have everything stored in the back. I had dirty underwear and stuff. I was just throwing this stuff out. I get my binoculars out, and I say, holy shit, it's Drycopus pileatus. And the girl that I was with had a palpable look of fear on her face. Fear and concern and And as I'm looking at this bird, which it was the first time, this is a pileated woodpecker. You guys don't have them in Australia. It's a woodpecker, it's about this big, and when it hammers on a tree, it sounds like a jackhammer on concrete, and wood chunks fly. It's just a bizarre bird. And I watched this bird, and I thought to myself, has anything ever been so perfectly designed for a job? Okay, so if you look at this bird, it has 2 toes that are forward pointing, 2 toes that are backward pointing. Most birds have 3 toes forward, 1 toe back. This has been adapted so that it can clamp. This bird also doesn't, remember how important energy in biological systems? We don't burn energy uselessly. So go ahead and make a fist. Hold that fist as tight as you can. To keep that fist taut, you have to exert energy. That's because your tendons don't lock. That bird has ratcheted tendons. So when it squeezes, it doesn't expend any more energy to hold it. To release, it has a little tiny muscle in its ulna, and it goes, or its foot, and it goes, and then it releases. So it doesn't expend energy to grip. Now, it hammers against this tree, and it hammers so hard that if it was, had our brain, I mean, it would be fully concussed and die after its first time. We have 3 layers of protective layers around our brain, the maters, M-A-T-E-Rs. They have 4. And it's kind of jelly-filled to protect their brain. And that tail, see how it's got its tail pressed right up against that tree like that? Okay, most birds don't have very stiff tail feathers. They have to be agile. Their tail feathers are very stiff, and they act as a recoiling spring. So when it hits its head against that tree and it comes back, it hits those recoiling springs which throw it forward so it doesn't expend energy. Now, after all that's done, why is he hammering on a tree? Because he wants some insects that's down in there. And he's got a tongue that's longer than almost any other animal per its body size in the animal kingdom. Really long tongue. It can go down there and find bugs. It's perfectly designed for its job. And I stood there marveling at its design, how its form fit its function. And in business, form should fit function as well. This bird, this animal, doesn't have things it doesn't need. It doesn't have redundancy built into its systems. See, redundancy is terrible for business. When you have superfluous redundancy, so what do? We have this creature, an accountant, and he comes in a certain form, pocket protector, tape on the glasses. You know him, or her. I'm kidding, for all the accountants. It was a joke. I didn't mean it. But accountants have a certain form and function. And let's say that accountant one day fits within this niche and is doing their work. And one day that accountant makes a mistake. In other words, their form didn't fit the function. And so, oh no, we've made a mistake, we've lost money, we've misallocated money, or there's a mistake that's been made. And so now what do? In most organizations, we add a process to this to say, okay, now Omar, the accountant, okay, doesn't fit just perfect. And so because there's this mistake that could be made, we're going to add another system on top of it to double check Omar's work. Right? To make sure, and so I was talking to somebody else today who's applying for a grant, Hassan, who says, I have this signature, I have this signature, and I have this sign-off and this sign-off. So we build these redundant systems that don't add value. Ask yourself, if you're about to start a business or you're in business, does every part of my business have value? Is any part of it redundant? And if it is, you need to build a better system. You need to build a better form, or you need to change the function. Biology teaches us that. That doesn't mean, that's not to say that that one thing can't have more than one function. I mean, that beak, right, it pounds through trees. It's also used as a resonation chamber for when it's trying to warn other birds that it's its territory. But make sure that everything has a value-added function to your enterprise. So when I would work with companies, I'd always ask, what's the function that you're trying to achieve? And what's the form that system needs to take? That girl, I'm happy to say now I know this, been married 22 years, so she stuck it out. I think that sometimes she may doubt the wisdom of that decision, but still around. So a third epiphany. This happened in 1994. This is probably, if I put them on the scale, this was the big one. This is a good one. I was in Ecuador, which is a small country in South America, and I was working for the United States Department of Energy. I had a rebellious phase early in my career where I became a nuclear scientist. It didn't last, you know. I guess it was better than getting a tattoo on my neck, but anyway. So I worked as a nuclear scientist for the Department of Energy, and I was down in Ecuador, and I had some free time, and so I was going to go bird watching. And on the side of the mountain that morning, I saw my first hummingbird. They are beautiful. First hummingbird of the day. It's called a brown violet ear. And I saw it eating out of a particular flower. And I watched it for a while. And as the day went on, I kept tallying up the hummingbirds that I saw. And one day, on one mountain, I saw 30 species of hummingbirds. I live on the Mississippi River in the United States. From the Mississippi River, which is in the middle of the country, to the Atlantic Ocean, which is half of our country, there is one species of hummingbird. On one mountain in a tiny country, I saw 30. My mind was blown. I said, how is this possible? How could you have this much diversity? And the reality is if we go back hundreds of thousands, probably millions of years, there might have been one predecessor hummingbird that was fitted out perfectly to feed on a flower, a particular flower. And so its beak was made for that. Its biology was made for that. And then one day, a bird was born, the special one. Hatched, should say hatched, they're not born. Was hatched. Maybe had a slight curve in the bill, wasn't quite like the others. And it was able to feed on a flower that had a slightly curved throat. And then many generations pass, and the flowers change because the hummingbirds that feed on them and pollinate them, make them change. And so now there's a flower that has a slightly more curved throat. And then you see a hummingbird that has a more curved beak. And you see this ecosystem evolve where there's competition for resources. There's a proliferation in the ecosystem. And so competition brings diversity, and it helps you identify your niche. So what are we taught in business, right? What do we want to do? We always want to beat our competition. But let me ask you, when you're trying to grow a new market, right? Most of you are trying to go into markets that don't even exist yet. If you're by yourself, who bears the cost of failure? Only you. If you're trying to grow a market for something that needs to be done because it's good for the world, and it's just you, right? And you don't have competition out there that's growing that market with you, it's hard to really solve the problem. And the other thing is competition helps you find your niche. I always say, don't hate your competition. They're helping you grow your beak. When I had the Industrial Solutions Group was the name of the company, I'd have a company Christmas party or a holiday party, and we would invite people from our customers, our vendors, our employees from all over the world. And every year, 30% of the attendees were our competition. And I'd thank them because they made us better. So it doesn't mean that when you're trying to get into a space, it doesn't mean that you're not competing. No, compete. But don't think your competition's evil or trying, or not trying to get to the same place you are. A lot of times you might have to partner with your competition. There's two species of hummingbirds that actually they feed on the same flower, but the one pokes a hole in the bottom of the flower, which attracts bugs. Okay, and it eats the nectar from there, and then the other hummingbird comes into the flower from the other side and eats the bugs. They work together. So another epiphany happened. I was in high school. A sidebar about me in high school. I got kicked out of high school 3 times. In the United States, it's illegal to skip school, and so you can go to juvenile hall for that, apparently. Not apparently, certainly. I skipped so much school, I had to go to juvie because, and they said, what kind of hell are you getting into? What kind of trouble, And I said, man, I swear I'm just watching birds. You can't expect me to attend school while there is a migration going on. Apparently they can. They can have that expectation. High schoolers, just late. I was in high school. I was a senior in high school, and I was really excited because there was, I saw a male great horned owl, which is the largest owl in North America. It's Bubo virginianus. And it's a really spectacular specimen. And I saw him kind of building a nest. And he had a female, and I was super excited because it was right on my way to school. Again, problematic for my academic progress, but cool for me. And it was a mild winter, and there hadn't been much snow, and there had been food that was plentiful, so I was fully expecting that there would be at least 2 baby owls. Those are called owlets. And I was thinking there might be 3. So when it came for the mama to lay her eggs, I had broken off my brother's rearview mirror, which he didn't take too kindly to, and put it on a broomstick, so I could put a mirror up there and see how many eggs there were. I had a bet with myself. I said, I bet there's 3. There was only 1. It's only 1 egg. And when it came to hatch, sure enough, there was just 1 owlet that actually hatched. Now, this didn't add up to me because it had been a mild winter. But when I stopped and I thought about it, we had a late flood. And as often happens in the upper Midwest, again, where you have a flood and it freezes, okay, then the critters below often die. And so something happened that was external to their relationship, right? This exogenous effect that the animal responded to and didn't have 3 eggs, even though its body could have. It only laid 1 egg because that's what the resource could provide. That's called feedback. That's called listening to feedback. Right? And what happens when we don't listen to feedback? When we have 3 eggs when we should only have 1, when we put 2 offices in a new community when we should only put 1, or when we have lots of growth in a market where we shouldn't have any. When we don't listen to feedback, what happens is Lehman Brothers. What happens is AIG. what happens is too big to fail. It causes the ecosystem to collapse. Now, who's responsible for developing the feedback loops that you've got to listen to as an enterprise? You. You have to identify what's happening in the ecosystem that could influence your business. You have to identify feedback that's going to matter to your enterprise and act on it. And this is what I worked with my clients on all the time. What are your leading indicators? What are the things that are signals to you that the environment is changing? Do you know? Is it what you wished it was, or is it what is? Feedback matters, and if you don't understand your own feedback that's informing how you're going to operate your business, it means you're really operating blind. That's a really dangerous place to be as an enterprise. The last epiphany that happened, well, not the last, but it's one of the more recent ones, was in about 2006. We had an environmental restoration. We had an area that had been basically zoned agricultural, and it was really an old wetland. And so we restored it back to its original state, and we invested a lot in this, and the community was involved, and it was a really neat project. But we took a wetland that had been agricultural for well over 100 years, but prior to that, for millennia, had been a wetland, and we restored it. And I was walking through that wetland, and I heard, and I said, and it said, and I said, holy shit. You guys don't speak Sparrow? Okay, I'll translate. It said, hi. I said, hey there. It says, I'm Amadramus Hensley. And I said, what? You're not supposed to be here? How did you know to be here? It said, I've always known to be here. I was born to be here. Important information in biological systems isn't left up to individuals. It's codified on DNA. It's on their genetic code. Birds can navigate two different ways. Birds can navigate, they're hardwired to navigate by the stars and by landmarks. And check this out. Birds can actually navigate by the stars and landmarks at the same time. It knew that that was a good place to nest. And so even though it hasn't nested there for over 120 years, as soon as it was built, it was back. Because that knowledge was too important to just trust to an individual. The good stuff is coded. The good stuff isn't lost. What are you doing in your business? Are you codifying that knowledge so that you don't have to worry about it leaving when Sally leaves to go to a different company? Are you codifying that knowledge and put it in informal systems so that you don't have to worry 5, 10 years from now when you're tired and you're ready to hang up the cleats, that your enterprise and your mission can continue? You put that stuff in standard work. You codify that. This is the problem, right? When you're an entrepreneur, trust me, I know, right? And I may sound like I'm preaching. My dad's a preacher, so it kind of comes by me a little naturally. But anyway, I don't want to over-preach, but, you know, I've been there where you just do things and you do things and you're just going because there's work to be done. I don't have time to codify this. I don't have time to make standard work. I don't have time to make standard operating procedures so that we don't make the same mistake twice. You don't have that time until the next time somebody says, hey, did we ever make this mistake? I don't know. It's more costly. So that was an epiphany for me, and I worked really hard in my own business to make standard operating procedures, and it was really, and to codify the knowledge. When we learned something new, we were constantly updating these documents so that if a person who came to my company, day one, anything they needed to do within our company was in a source that was accessible and correct. So, to recap, I hope that maybe, if all you took was the pictures and those were cool and you're now inspired to go bird watching, then I'm cool with that. But hopefully there's some lessons here. The first is to understand that good operations, they eliminate waste. Constantly. Will brought up earlier the lean startup methodology. I'm a big fan of lean management systems. The second thing is form fits function, and redundancy is another form of waste. The cardinal sin of an efficient enterprise is redundancy. Do we like redundancy in airplanes? Yes. Do we like redundancy in our business? No. Doesn't add value. Always ask yourself, would the customer think that this is valuable? That I have to have 4 people sign this document for me to move forward? Would the customer say that's valuable? If the answer is no, fix the form or fix the function. Lesson 3, the big one. Competition makes you better. It spreads the risk of failure, and good competitors grow markets. Most of you are going into growing markets, or markets that don't exist. All right? The smartphone market didn't do too well when Palm was the only player, or the PDA, Palm Pilot. Some of you guys who are over 40, you say, oh, I remember Palm Pilot. Everybody who was cool who had one. Where's Palm Pilot now? Right. They're gone. Okay, it's when you have competition and the risk of failure is spread. So that's not a bad thing. Lesson number 4 is, and this is, every business struggles with this, but find your feedback and listen. If something looks askew, it probably is. Investigate. And then the last one, which I just mentioned, is codify knowledge. Don't lose knowledge. That's too valuable. You work too hard for it. So those are the lessons from the presentation, and I was going to end it there. And some of you are probably saying, I wish you would. But there are 2 more lessons. As I was finishing this up, I said, wow, how hard is it to acquire my superpower, really? It wasn't that hard. Really, just being observant is extremely valuable. So that's the first lesson. The other lesson, the bonus lesson, which is to be observant. But the other thing is, I sat here and I said, I'm going to be preaching to these people about the lessons that I learned. And how did I learn them? I learned them from my experience, from who I am, from what I bring to my reality. And you're going to listen to a lot of people who are going to tell you to do things a certain way. You should do this, you should do that, you should be this, you should be that. But really, bring your own wisdom. Okay, I don't care how old you are. I don't care how new you are. I don't care what experience you think you don't have. Your experience is valuable. Your wisdom is important. If you bring all of yourself and are authentic to your work and true to yourself, I guarantee you'll have better results than trying to be the next Michaela or the next Joe or the next Will or the next Mara, whomever. Your wisdom's valuable. I shared with you my wisdom, the wisdom that I've accumulated through 40 years of what some people would say is a useless hobby. Bring your whole self to your work. Don't be ashamed. Seek wisdom where you can. Seek wisdom. But also seek your own wisdom. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it a lot.